Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the International Center Goa for this edition of Kitaab, for which we have Nikhila Henry, who currently works for the Huffington Post. And we'll be discussing her book, The Ferment, Youth Unrest in India. This is a topic of immense importance. And this is probably, as far as I can recall, the third speaker or visitor we have had to talk about things like education, gender ratio, male-female ratio, and about the young in general. So 2 years ago, I recall we had Maheshwar Perry talking about the state of higher education in the country, what the young people had to look forward to, what were the obstacles, whether in terms of quality of education, whether in terms of the kinds of divisions you have within the community, within the student community, politics, to just about everything. Then about a year later, we had Annie Govan of the Washington Post come here, because what the Washington Post had done a large report on male-female ratio, and again, it was a lot about young people. We know that in the last elections, for example, first-time voters and young people more broadly were given a lot of attention by political parties. In fact, there was a concerted effort to woo the young. And what to me is very, very interesting is, and Nikhila's book is about that, is the past few years, the last 5 years, 10 years, student politics or student engagement with politics, or in general, I mean, not just in campuses, but also outside. It's not as if you have a very large engagement across the country, but there are pockets where you have more than normal kind of engagement, not just voting or being part of a political party, but protests. And when the BJP government takes power in 2014, it's not as if all the protests begin from then on against the ruling party. But student protests have dotted India's political landscape, India's landscape in general, for a while. I mean, I was a kid when the JP movement started in Bihar. I'm from there, and I remember, it was huge, it was enormous. And then, you had the emergency, of course. So my memories of student engagement in politics go back to the JP years, where a couple of uncles dragged me to Gandhi Maidan in Patna, and where JP was speaking against Indira Gandhi and her excesses. And it was all students. It was, you could simply make out it was all students. When you look at India's current demographic profile, people have been talking about something called the demographic dividend for a while. That depends much on the kind of education the young people get. There are parents among us, there are students among us, parents whose children are not yet settled, whether they are men or women, would be concerned about those things. Students themselves would be concerned about these things. And you begin to ask yourself questions like whether as students should you be engaged with politics, and if yes, to what extent. So this question is terrifically important because of what has happened across university campuses in the country, whether at Jawaharlal Nehru University, which I attended, which so many people who have been here have been to JNU, including former High Commissioner to Pakistan, T.C. Raghavan, who was here. A couple of ministers are from JNU. The University of Hyderabad, which is described, what happened there is described in some detail by Nikhila. Other campuses across the country, and we look at formerly great universities, even Allahabad University, Patna University, and other places where the ferment has been kind of negative. When you think of ferment, you can attribute some. If there's ferment, something good can come out of it. Except that right now we don't know what will come out of it. We have absolutely no clue, because the quality of education, India's higher education sector is in shambles. The best institutions, the IITs and the IIMs, they strive to be non-political or apolitical. Is that the way forward? The stories you have in Nikhila Henry's book suggest that not. If you look at stories from across the world, students at the forefront of pro-democracy movements, students at the forefront of social justice movements, students at the forefront of all kinds of struggles, men and women, right? What you have also in India is we do not have reliable numbers on employment. We do know that employability rates among college graduates is improved, but can we trust those numbers? It's said to be around 40%. It used to be less than 30% a few years ago. Have things really improved so much? I'm not so sure. I look at the education sector myself, and I don't trust those numbers. So what happens when you have young people going to college, their expectations change because they are attending college, and they remain unemployed or underemployed? What happens to a student community? What happens within student communities which are, much like the rest of society, fractured along the lines of gender, of course, caste, subcaste, religion, class? Can they come together as students first for the larger cause of not just social justice? Because social justice, you can frame social justice in so many different ways. You can frame it only on the caste axis, right? You can frame it only on the class axis. You can frame it only on the gender axis. But if you have a fractured student community, which pretty much is similar to the kind of fractured communities that are around us, including in Goa, right? I mean, the political events of the past few days suggest that all is not well, right? So Nikhila Henry's book is about this and more. And before I quickly introduce her, what I'll also do is tell you two things. One, that we are not going to follow the regular format of a book discussion where the discussant and the author keep talking discussing something or the other about the book for the next 40-45 minutes. But after the first couple of questions or even my observations, we'll just get the audience involved. You may not have read the book, but the book is on some very, very large questions. It deals with some very large universal issues which affect you. Right? I mean, I see students here, there are parents here. And I would begin by asking you, what do you think about something like this political engagement of young people, students? What about your own kids? If they are, going to stand for student elections and such things? What if they are going to protest against what they perceive as one wrong or the other? Forget for which political party, on which issue and all that. Would you be supportive of that? If not, why? Okay, so we are going to change the format. We are going to go back and forth. We'll take about 2 or 3 questions from the audience, then come back here and then throw it back at you, depending on how the discussion proceeds. Also, a couple of quick announcements. We are trying to finalize the dates for our next visitor, who will be Pooja Mehra, who has a book out called The Lost Decade, which is a review of economic policies under UPA 2 and the Modi government. So it mixes it up in 2008 to 18. And that would be in August. And in September, we launched our Patrakar series earlier this year with Sankarshan Thakur and his work on Bihar and on Kashmir. So that was a session on Patrakar. And we are going to have in September Mark Tully come here on 19th September. The grand old man of BBC, formerly of BBC. So he's going to be here on 19th September. Nikhila Henry, very quickly. She is currently with the Huffington Post, covering news from South Indian states. She earlier worked for The Hindu, reporting on education, student politics, civic administration, and social welfare. An alumnus of the International Visitor Leadership Program on Investigative Journalism of the United States State Department, Nikhila worked as a principal correspondent for the Times of India in Hyderabad for 8 years, covering education, youth agitations, gender struggles, and politics. She also compiled and edited Rohit Vemula's online diary, Caste is Not a Rumor. The Ferment is her first book. Nikhila, any opening remarks? Let me begin with a very obvious kind of question. We were talking earlier that this book is partly drawn from your reporting for the Times of India and perhaps the Hindu. And then I asked you whether you had to do more work, or was it did it simply stop at that? What really pushed you towards writing a book? Because it's not as if every journalist does. And certainly many younger journalists, these days there are more of them writing books, but still many younger journalists simply remain reporters, right?
First of all, I should thank Dr. Pushkar and the International Center Goa for inviting me here. It's quite a great city. I've not been here quite often, only once earlier than this, and it's rainy and it's beautiful. And all of you came here on a Saturday morning. I'm quite surprised by that. Thank you for having me here. About the book and the experiences of reporting, I think, about 10 years I covered education as one of my beats. It just so happened that the beat was handed down to me. So I started writing, when I started reporting on education, the main focus was basically the cycle of, the exams, then the results. In between there would be the academic year where something or the other happens. So the cycle kept, repeating a year after year, and I was on the beat for quite a long time. So like any other beat reporter, I felt that this the cycle of education is actually not how a student experiences an academic year. That's not the student's experience, on campus, because I was also a student, like most of you were, and some of you still are students, I guess. So you have an experience of the campus, you have an experience of the society outside, you have experience of media, you have experience, which you have carried as baggage from your past, like your background. So none of this actually figured in the education reporting at that point of time. So it is out of this dire need of, having to write about the student experience on a campus that I started writing about things, which are related to student politics, some agitation somewhere. So, people used to tell me very jokingly that, Nikhila, anything happens in the city, in Hyderabad or, in the outskirts, you somehow find a student angle. How do you do that? So when Osmania University, when, the separate statehood agitation happened in Telangana, I was able to camp myself in Osmania University, which was which held fort for quite a long time. And it's I still believe that it's the students who actually led that movement, and we have a new state. So you can always find a youth, element in most of what happens in our country. And now it is more pronounced, but at that point of time it was not. So later on, when so I kept doing this for quite some time, and there were a lot of stories, which would appear in the inside pages. It's nobody's fault. It's just that people wouldn't think that, this story is very important because this has a peculiar angle. Some student died somewhere, you're saying that it is caste, but is it really caste? Or, it could be some personal problem, but in the suicide note, it doesn't indicate that it is caste. The police says that it is, some girlfriend trouble or, some other personal issue. So how are you saying that? So all these questions you have to grapple with on a day-to-day basis, and most of the stories, some of the stories may appear, some may not. So when Rohit Vemula's suicide happened, I think that was a watershed moment, because what I had been covering till then, it actually found a voice, and I felt that was a historic moment where everyone started writing about what was happening in academic spaces. Earlier there used to be one or two reporters here and there on the beat. So I think that it is out of that compelling need of documenting that moment that I started, I wrote a book. I don't know whether there is anything else in the offing, but...
Very quickly, getting to the title of the book, and I casually mentioned, ferment can have both positive and negative connotations. Where did the title come from? Was it you who selected, or the publisher's editor?
No, it was a collective effort. So first, there were a few suggestions. One was churning, the other was ferment. It went through a particular process. Like I wanted to, first I thought of the book as, something which will be, sorry, as a text which will be centered around Rohit Vemula. But then I realized later on that, that would limit what was happening in the country. So based on that, from a book on Rohit, it became, something about what was happening across the country, and it was named Ferment, yeah.
It definitely is a larger
Right,
story rather
right.
than,
And the agitations across the country, this has been my experience, reporting experience, that it has always been, the agitations have always been simmering across the country. So, that's why, the ferment of, over a period of time, there is a ferment happening, a churning happening.